Since it's spooky season, today we're going to be making these adorable little ghost type Pokemon. Pokemons? Pokemon. Alright, let's get started. Since this is somehow my only Phantump Pokemon card, I'll keep it here with me as a reference, even though it's honestly not a great reference for the dimensions of things. But that's okay. I'll look at some references online later to make sure the bodies are roughly the right size relative to their heads. I start by rolling out a ball of extra firm cos clay, and then pushing it onto one of my metal ballpoint tools to start giving it that hollowed out tree stump shape. I smooth it out with some mineral oil, and then start adding the eye sockets in with a smaller ballpoint tool. And I use an even smaller ballpoint tool to add in a cute little surprised mouth shape. To smooth out the eye socket edges a bit, I use some more mineral oil, and then before baking, I add in his little tree stump grooves with my large needle tool. Since the metal ballpoint tool and the clay are very hot, and I'm very impatient, I use a towel to remove my first Phantump head from its mold. And I set it down on a baked clay bowl while it cools off. Then I mark off where I want to trim his little head, and I carefully trim it with an X-Acto knife and hollow out the inside a bit more. For the horn branches, I roll out some long cones of extra firm cos clay and bend them into their final curvy shapes. Using my pointy silicone tool, I blend the horns into the head and then add his cartoony little tree stump lines. And the final sculpting step for the stump is hollowing out the bottom of the head with an X-Acto knife. For his little black flamey hat thingy, I roll out a cone of black cos clay, and similar to the horns, I curve it into its final shape. And then after baking it, I decide it's not the right size or shape. So I do that 3 more times until I realize I should really consult the size reference image, which I did for this last one. Then I decide to fill in his eye sockets with some black clay, which at the time I didn't realize how unnecessary this step would be, since I was going to paint over the entire thing in dark brown, but I guess it's good to know that I can do this for future builds that involve minimal painting. Speaking of unnecessary work, since the next step is making the green leaves for my Phantumps, I figured I'd use my leaf green cos clay that I hadn't opened yet. While I condition my leaf green clay, let's read Phantump's lore. According to old tales, these Pokemon are stumps possessed by the spirits of... You know what, let's not do that, actually. Let's talk about why Phantumps are so cute! For me, I really love their design because they remind me of the Knight from Hollow Knight, and because they can look like adorable little moody babies, like this one I drew a few years ago. With my green clay conditioned, I start shaping out one of the little leaves using my fingers. And after doing that about 15 more times, I get started on the first Phantump body. At first I thought it looked fine, so I baked it, but then the next day I looked at it again and I thought it was a little too big, so I made a second one. Then I lined the top of the head with some black clay and add some clay glue to the body so that I can stick some cute little arms on him. I smooth those out with my sculpting tools and some mineral oil, and then I double check that they look right in relation to the head. Yep, adorable. Now it's time to attach the little green leaves to my Phantump's horns. I start by adding some dots of clay glue, and then I add some raw gray clay and glue to the leaf and attach it on. For most of my subsequent Phantumps, I attached the leaves onto the horns while they were still raw because that helped them to stick better. But this worked out pretty well considering. And now it's time to completely disregard all of the clay colored choices I've made so far and paint my Phantump's head dark brown. And then dry brush it brown, and more aggressively dry brush it honey brown. I don't know why, but the final dry brushing just gets me every time. I love it. Next, I paint the leaves dark green. And while I impatiently wait for that paint to dry, I paint the eye sockets black with one of my metal ballpoint tools. And since I couldn't help but trying to wipe off a little of the black paint that got outside of the eye socket, I accidentally wiped away all of my dry brushing on one big spot on his face. So, I guess it's time to find out if I can re-dry brush something without it looking ridiculous. I start with the brown dry brushing, and then finish with the honey brown, which I should have used a different brush for so that the colors wouldn't mix, but it turned out okay despite the slight color mixing between the brown and honey brown. I also dry brushed the rest of the face again a bit to try to blend together my 2 different dry brushing sessions. Wow, I honestly can't believe that that kind of worked. With the comfort of knowing that I was somehow able to salvage my Phantump, let's eat! This is my current food obsession: scrambled eggs with air-fried potatoes, cheddar cheese, and hot sauce. So good. With my tummy full and the dark green paint dried, I paint the leaves light green. Why did I paint them dark green to begin with? A good question. I paint the black parts black, really just to cover up any spots that were painted brown earlier. And I paint the body black just to color match the black head components that I painted first. And before the black paint dries, it's time to paint the light pink eyes. I realize as I bring my ballpoint tool to the eye socket that I need to use a smaller ballpoint tool for this. So I did that. And even with my hands shaking, I'm surprised with how well these turned out. And I resist the urge to touch up his left eye, well, his right eye, since I was still scared from the repainting incident. For their final step, I varnish my Phantumps with some matte acrylic varnish. Whoa, where are we? We're outside collecting leaves, of course. This is one of my favorite fall traditions, collecting leaves that will make good specimens for miniaturization. After washing my leaves and removing as much dog pee and little critters that might be on them, I pat my first leaf dry and bring out my leaf stamp cutters. One is an oak leaf shape and the other is birch leaf shaped. Then I prep my first leaf by trimming the stem and cutting it in half, and I get started on stamping my first leaf, doing my best to align one of the leaf's veins with where the middle vein or midrib would be on my miniature leaf. Then I stamp out some more tiny oak leaves from my first leaf until I run out of good areas to stamp. Moving on to my next leaf, which is this pretty yellow one, I use my birch leaf cutter with it, again doing my best to line up with the mid vein. After stamping out the rest of my leaves, this is what they look like. And after letting them dry overnight, this is what they look like. The first time I stamped leaves a few years ago, I would stamp them from already dried leaves, which led to really flat miniature leaves. But by stamping them when they're still kind of fresh, the miniature leaves curl really beautifully like this. With my Phantumps and leaves ready, it's time for our photo shoot. Oh, and before I forget, since I wanted these guys to float in the air in my final photos after editing, I not so carefully drilled holes in the bottom backs of their heads to fit some armature wire that will help hold them up during our photo shoot. And he passes the wiggle test. All right, time for our photo shoot. If you have any Pokemon you'd like to see me try next, please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.